This is the Death Row and Executions channel. Here is your host, Paco Rivera.
Welcome back to the Death Row and Executions channel. My name is Paco Rivera. You can also follow me on Facebook for updates and more Death Row news. There will be a link to my Facebook in the description below. Also, check out my other channel here on YouTube called The Maximum Sentence, where I cover recent crimes and convictions. There will be a link for that as well. The crime I'm going to talk about today happened in November of the year 1989. About 35 years ago. But Garcia Glen White, who is now 61 years old, hasn't been on death row in Texas that long because he wasn't apprehended and charged with the murders until 6 years after the crime occurred in 1995. And the trial and sentencing didn't happen until a year after that, when he was found guilty and sentenced to death in July of 1996. So he's been on death row 28 years. Here is a man, Garcia White, who finished high school at Whitley High School in Houston, Texas, and was enrolled for a time at Lubbock Christian University, where he also played football. But a knee injury permanently ended his hopes of continuing that, and he dropped out of school. During an investigation into Garcia White's background, they discovered that he had no disciplinary problems while going to school. After dropping out, he began working odd jobs as a cook and a house painter, but later developed a bad drug habit that would prove to be his downfall. White has been regarded by authorities as a serial killer, as he is suspected of having committed various murders before the November 1989 triple murder that he was sentenced to death for. He has in fact confessed to other murders. However, White has not been charged or convicted with any other murders. Once again, as I have mentioned in similar cases from the previous ones I've covered, where a murderer is convicted and sentenced to death, yet is not charged with other murders that authorities have proof that he committed, this may be another situation where the state already has him on death row, so why bother? In one case that I covered recently, that of David Hosier, where the bodies of two victims were found together, yet Hosier was only convicted and sentenced to death for the murder of one of them, and he was ultimately executed back in June of this year for that crime. In November 1989, when Garcia Glen White was 26 years old, remember he's now 61. When White was 26 years old, he was in the habit of visiting drug houses, crack houses, and one of those homes belonged to a 38-year-old woman named Bonita Edwards. Bonita also had twin daughters, Bernette and Annette Edwards, who had both just turned 16 years old that month of November in 1989. The girls were attending Kashmere High School in Houston. Bonita was a single mother, as her husband, the twins' father, had been murdered in 1973, the same year that the twin girls were later born. Family members of the twins have reported that both Bernette and Annette had become aware of their mom using the house for transactions of drugs and were afraid of continuing to live there because of all the strange people that were going in and out of the house. They had made plans to go live with their grandmother, and they were in the process of making that happen. One day, that November of 1989, Garcia White arrived at the home. Now, most of what we know of what happened in that home that day we got from him, from Garcia White's confession to police 6 years later. According to White, he and Bonita Edwards were doing drugs in the house when they both got into a very heated argument that eventually became violent. He said he ended up stabbing Bonita to death, and that both twin girls came out of the bedroom to see what was going on when hearing all the noise. White said he then stabbed one of the girls as the other one ran back into the bedroom and locked the door. White said he busted that door open and proceeded to kill the other twin before fleeing the scene. This was in late November of 1989. Bonita Edwards during this time was involved in an affair with a 64-year-old man named King Solomon. On December 2nd, Solomon had become worried about why he hadn't heard from Bonita in a while and went to her home to check on her. But when he got there, the door was locked. He asked several neighbors about Bonita, and everyone told him that they hadn't seen or heard from her or the girls for a few days. Solomon then convinced a maintenance man to open the apartment door, and once inside, they discovered the bodies of all three victims. Houston police investigated, but were unable to come up with any leads in the case, and the case went cold for the next 6 years. In July of 1995, Garcia White and a friend named Tecumseh Manuel robbed a convenience store in Houston, and the store clerk was beaten to death. Leads were developed quickly in that case, and both White and Manuel were arrested and charged with robbery and murder. During interrogations at the police station, possibly trying to get a better deal on the charges against him, Manuel told investigators that 6 years earlier, Garcia White had killed a woman and her 2 teenaged daughters. When investigators then asked White about that, he at first denied everything. However, when he was told that Manuel had given them all the details of what happened that day in the home of Bonita Edwards, White began to confess. However, he first told police that he had arrived at Bonita's home with another man named Terrence Moore to do drugs, and that it was his friend who stabbed and killed Bonita and her twin daughters. When investigators looked into Terrence Moore, they found out that he had died 6 months before those murders of Bonita, Bernette, and Annette. When confronted with this, White said, "Yeah, okay, I was there alone and I killed them." The medical examiner determined that Bonita was also indecently assaulted. White would later say that that did not happen. While DNA testing was not readily available in 1989, years later, during appeals by Garcia White, DNA proved that White's semen was on the victim's body. He would then continue to insist that he had not indecently assaulted Bonita, but that he did ejaculate on her body. Please remember to hit the subscribe button for more death row and upcoming execution stories so that you are alerted when the next one comes out. You can also follow me on Facebook for updates. There will be a link to my Facebook in the description below. I am Paco Rivera. Take care and